Ready? 1 Samuel chapter 14. So this is December 21st. 1 Samuel chapter 14, only for the strong of heart. So 1 Samuel chapter 13, can anybody remind me where we've been? Some of the context we've been through? Anybody remember last week? Charles is the only one who pays attention. So in 1 Samuel chapter 13, we had the defeat of the Philistines, which was a kick to the hornet's nest, right? So Jonathan is introduced. Jonathan attacks a garrison that the Philistines had in Gibeah. He defeated them. He took out one of their prefects. And now the Philistines came out with an innumerable host. So 30,000 chariots or wagons, 6,000 horsemen, and infantry that they were unable to count, right? As the sand on the seashore is what it says. So the Philistines came out with an extreme army with prejudice. And they divided into three camps, and they went north, and they went east, and they didn't go east. They went west, and they went like southwest. And so they went through Israel and started massacring and taking goods and things, because they have to feed their army, right? So they're taking water and resources, and they're doing whatever they want because they're raiding the nation of Israel, because the nation of Israel had just attacked one of their outposts. What was the response of Israel? Jonathan just got a hair up his nose and was like, I'm doing this. Yeah. His dad was doing nothing, and Jonathan has a tendency to not react, but he gets frustrated with inaction. So where he had a poor leader who was his father, he responded by doing something. And so he had 1,000 men under his charge, and he's like, here we go, guys, this is what we're going to do. That was Saul. Saul fell under pressure. If we remember, the Israelites were extremely afraid. They were in terror. They went and hid in rocks and caves and caverns, and they tried to just run for their lives. Saul sacrificed instead of waiting for Samuel. Yeah. So there was no weapons in Israel. The blacksmiths had been taken in the previous occupancy, and nobody had weapons except for who? Saul and Jonathan. So Saul and Jonathan were the only ones who had a sword, right? The two leaders. There was the king, and the right hand to the king, which was his son, was a commander of part of the army, right? Now, Saul sinned, and the consequence for his sin, right? Instead of obeying what Samuel had told him, you need to wait 7 days. When I come, then we will offer the sacrifices. He waited 7 days and missed the last couple minutes, and he offered the sacrifice. Anybody remember the punishment? What happened? What Samuel's response was? He said, wait 7 days. Samuel showed up on the seventh day, but it was in the evening. It was like, exactly. So Saul didn't stay in his lane. He did somebody else's job, which is a poor leader. A good leader does his job and lets other people do their job. And he offered the sacrifice that was not his place. It was for the priest to offer the sacrifice. Saul took the knife and did it himself, right? So the consequence was, you have disobeyed the Lord, and your kingdom would have been forever, but instead he has replaced you with somebody better, right? Somebody after the Lord's heart, particularly, right? So here, what we're going to find in 1 Samuel chapter 14 is a man after God's heart. Jonathan. Jonathan is a really good representation of a faithful servant of the Lord. This entire character of Jonathan, this man of history, every step of the way, he does the right thing. He is not King David. He is not the number one man, but he is the best friend to the number one man. He is not the king, but he is the son of the king. He is a really, really good number two. And he loves the Lord. He has a faith in God, and his faith takes action. And that's what we're going to find. So 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 1. One day, Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side. But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave or tree at Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men, including Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rock crag on the one side and a rocky crag on the other side. The name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Seneh. The one crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." And his armor-bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart. Do as you wish. Behold, I am with your heart and soul." Then Jonathan said, "Behold, we will cross over to the men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be the sign to us." So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, "Look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden." And the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, "Come up to us, and we will show you a thing." And Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, and his armor-bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer killed them after him. And at the first strike which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made, they killed about 20 men, within as it were a half a furrow's length and an acre of land. And there was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked, and it became a very great fear of the Lord, or fear from the Lord. So every time I teach, I get excited about a chapter, and I'm like, man, this is such a fun chapter. I can't wait to teach you guys this. And then the next chapter comes, and I'm like, this is the next best chapter. This is great. Because every step of the way, we are building a story. We're building a visual understanding of history and time and events, and it just gets more fun. And right here is a very fun and exciting event. We have Jonathan, who I'm naming a man after God's heart, right? Because in the sequence of events, it almost seems like Jonathan's replacing his father. And that was the punishment that Samuel had told Saul. He said, "You've disobeyed. God is finding somebody who will actually follow him, and he will fill your role." And so it seems that Jonathan might be that man. And so here we have a very courageous act of valor that, depending on how you look at it, could be very foolish or brilliant. So what was this idea that Jonathan had? He's going to go up, he's going to reveal himself, and depending on what they say, he's going to know if God is on their side or not, right? So he's kind of testing the waters. He's like, okay, listen, I believe in God. You want to know how much I believe in God? I don't think God needs much, or I don't think little bit would hinder God. In fact, God can use us. So he looks at his armor bearer and he says, "Hey, I want to go over there and I want to fight those guys." What does his armor bearer say? "Let's do it," right? Now, that's really good leadership. If you say, "Hey, I want to go attack 500 people by myself. Will you come with me?" What kind of fool would say yes? A loyal fool, right? It's almost certain death. It's almost suicide to go up there. 1 versus hundreds normally doesn't add up properly in hand-to-hand combat, right? So the picture here is that of a man of God who believes that God is able to do a miracle even through small things, right? So God can use small tools because his hand is so mighty. He says, "We'll go up," or they say they'll come down. What is this idea that he talks about? So Jonathan says, this is how we know God is calling us to go up there and attack. We're going to show ourselves. And when the people respond, then we will know what God is saying. So the response comes back positive, and it turns out that the Philistines are more cowards than courageous. They don't want to leave their safe, secure location to go fight somebody. They want them to come fight them, right? So it would take more courage for Jonathan to go attack them than for them to come attack Jonathan. Does that make sense? Now, to get the picture here, it talks about it quite a bit. So in chapter 14, verse 4, it says, within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines, there was a crag, there was a rocky crag, there was Bozez in the name of Sina, and the one crag was on the north at Michmash, and the other at south at Geba. Why is it taking such a large space to explain all of these rocks? What do you think the point is here? The lay of the land? And what is the lay of the land? And that's where we get the verse in a little bit. It says, they hailed Jonathan, verse 13, then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet in his armor bearer. He couldn't just get up and walk on the stuff. He had to climb up this mountain. And then when he got to the top, you have this tunnel. You had rocks on the right and you had rocks on the left. So if I lived in a castle, there's one place where I think people wouldn't attack me, and that's from behind in the rocky crags. So he reveals himself and he's like, hey guys, and they're like, oh, what are you doing down there? And then they make fun of him. So they're like, hey, we want to show you something. Why don't you come up here? Find out what happens, right? So he climbs up the rock, and then there's a very narrow pathway. That narrow pathway is roughly about the distance from the front of the sanctuary all the way to the back of this hallway. It's half an acre, generally speaking. It's like the hallway down here when you come through the sanctuary. You get one door, and it's one little hallway. And he would fight one person at a time, 20 people. So who has a sword? Who doesn't have a sword? The armor bearer. So Jonathan goes in the front. He's beating dudes up. He's hitting them. He's knocking them out. He's whacking them with a sword, and he throws them behind him, or he just steps over them. And then here comes the cleanup crew behind him. And his armor bearer finalizes the sequence, and they just keep pushing forward. Now, there's something interesting that's happening right now. If we had a whole room of people in the sanctuary, and then something was happening in the hallway, and all you could see was something really, really bad in the hallway, we would all turn around and run away. You can't perceive what is actually happening on the other side. So from the Philistines' perspective, they're looking down the rocks. They see Jonathan pop his head up, maybe another guy pop his head up, and they're like, hey, come up here. And the next thing you know, in this tiny little corridor, people are dying. People are just getting slaughtered. And in your mind, you could start picturing the whole army of Israel climbing up this mountain. In your mind, here comes a full frontal attack, but it's coming from behind. And if we remember, Saul's greatest victory against the Amalekites was he split into groups of 3, and then he surrounded them and he actually flanked them, and he attacked them from behind. So Israel has used this technique before where they would attack their enemy from the backside. Now, they wouldn't be expecting it because it's a really difficult climb to get up there. But here comes Jonathan, and it says in verse 15, and there was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. Everybody started freaking out. Something has taken place that is shocking. The Israelites are here, and they're attacking us, and we're losing. That's just the natural order of the events that are taking place. Then comes the supernatural. You remember, Jonathan believes that God can deliver them. Jonathan believes that with a mighty hand, God will deliver Israel. And then it says, continuing in verse 15, the garrison and even the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, and it became a very great fear from God. I don't know, so your translation might read differently. It says a very great panic, a very great trembling. In the Hebrew, it literally means fear of God. It says it literally, fear from Elohim. Right? The idea is that there is a supernatural event where people are starting to panic, freak out, and really, we haven't gotten there yet. They start to kill each other. It's this panic that leads to attacking their own people. And that's why this is so effective. It was one little arrow that had poison on it, and that poison is going to start spreading through the camp. And you remember, that camp is massive. There's upwards of 600,000 people. Like, this is just an insane number of Philistines, and that poison's going to spread, and it's going to start decimating those people. Now, All of this is taking place. Who have we been talking about so far? Jonathan. And what is he doing? He's doing amazing things, right? He's like crushing it. You'd be like, that dude is amazing. So who are we not talking about? And why aren't we talking about Saul? Saul is hiding. Saul is hiding. He's about a mile away up in the mountains. It says in verse 2, if you remember, verse 1 was all about Jonathan. Let's go over to the Philistines, right? I can't handle this anymore. Jonathan's a man of action. He's tired of sitting around. We don't know how long this has been going on. We just know it's bad. In verse 2, it says, Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave at Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men. So he took the 600 people that he could find, the soldiers, and he just went away and cowered in a corner. The one place where the Philistines weren't going is the one place where Saul could be found. Now, including, verse 3, including Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people did not know that Jonathan was gone. So Saul was in hiding. And was Saul in charge? No. He didn't give the orders. He didn't receive notification. Jonathan's like, hey guys, I don't want to deal with all the people who are doubting what God's going to do. I'm going to go do it. Are you with me? He's like, yeah, I'll go with you. And they just wandered off because Saul's not in control. Now, Saul was with a priest. Why is that important? Saul did. Not the priest, and it wasn't at the temple. That was Saul's sin. That was the problem. So what did he do? Bring me a priest, right? But this entire time, he didn't need a priest. He was waiting for somebody else. Who was he waiting for? Samuel, because Samuel was the priest. Samuel would be the one to offer the sacrifice. You notice how there's a character missing? Samuel's not having it. Samuel's left. He's like, you're on your own. You don't obey God. You don't obey me. You don't follow basic instructions. I'm out. Because God's abandoning Saul. We're going to find that this gets worse and worse. We're just on the peak coming down. Not only was he cowering in the corner and surrounding himself with a priest, somebody who could represent God because Samuel's not around, he was also not ready for the battle. He was not ready for the battle. And this is where it gets pretty sad because Saul is really going to fail as a leader. His son has done something outstanding. God is doing a miracle through his son, and Saul's not ready. Saul is not capable of responding. When he does respond, he does it wrong. He makes foolish decisions, he makes brash decisions, and it creates more problems than solutions, and he actually ruins the level of victory that Israel would have had. God was going to do something amazing, and Saul stepped in, and God just did something good. Verse 16, and the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude was dispersing here and there. Then Saul said to the people who were with him, count and see who has gone from us. And when they had counted, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. So Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God here. For the ark of God went at that time with the people of Israel. Now, while Saul was talking to the priests, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went into the battle. And behold, every Philistine sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great confusion. Now the Hebrews, who had been with the Philistines before that time, and who had gone up with them into the camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites, who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, when all the men of Israel, who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim, heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed beyond Bethaven. So his first step, what's going on? Who's not here, right? There's only 600 people, so in an army of 600 people, you can take a count pretty quickly. So he takes a really quick inventory, and it finds out that it's Jonathan and his armor bearer. So what's his next step? They want to bring the ark. What would you do? Go do something, right? But what does he do? He turns around and he says, bring me the ark. Why is that significant? So you're remembering what we've read in 1 Samuel, that a couple chapters ago, this has happened before. Do you remember what happened the last time they took the ark out? Got really mad? Turned him over to the Philistines, right? The ark was captured by who? The Philistines. When? The last time they fought, right? Why would you turn and grab the ark? There was a quote from Matthew Henry, and I kind of paraphrased it. Saul is leaving the light And when you leave the light, you love the shadow of the thing that you've just left, right? When you have left true religion and your heart is far from God, you love the good things of true religion without having real religion. In 1 Timothy, it talks about they have an appearance of godliness, but they deny its power. It's a strange thing where superstition replaces genuine faith and knowledge in God. So that's what ends up happening with Saul. He turns away from walking in a genuine, sincere faith in God, and he turns to idols. And it gets so bad, he turns to witchcraft. And this is just one small step at a time. Now, it's fascinating. Saul doesn't know what's going on. He can't figure this stuff out. He responds with superstition, and he says, we need God on our side, so here's what we do. Mr. Priest, you notice how Saul learned his lesson? He's not doing it himself. He's actually going to the person whose job it is to do it. The priest shouldn't really be listening to him, but he does it anyways. We can get into Anglicanism and like the Anglican church, but we won't. The priests, they bring the ark, they're doing this stuff. Now something's taking place where the priest is doing something. It doesn't tell us what it is. He could be praying, he could be tossing the Urim and Thummim. They could be trying to understand what God's will is, to move left, to move right, to take charge here, or he could be offering a sacrifice. We don't know. All it says is this. So verse 18, so Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark. Verse 19, now, while Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. It's as if, remember how we talked about that poison spreading? The screams, the cries, the shaking. It says the earth was shaking in verse 15. Everything was becoming more and more chaotic. Saul is over here twiddling his thumbs and doing something. And finally, more and more, he responds, he says, we should probably just go, right? This is very bad leadership. This is what you call being reactionary. Instead of being proactive, you're reacting. Right? So Saul is reacting. And it says, he gathered all the people. Verse 21, now the Hebrews who had been with the Philistines before that time, who had gone up with them into the camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites. Who is it talking about there? The ones who had gone up to the Philistines had turned on them. Verse 21, the Hebrews, what's a Hebrew? So there were turncoats. When the Philistines showed up and attacked Israel, some of the Israelites surrendered, and they're like, hey man, if you leave us alone, we'll be on your team. It's like playing tag, and or like capture the flag. And instead of holding your ground and saying, I'm on my team and my team's gonna beat your team, they're like, hey, I really hate to lose. I'm gonna join your team. Is that okay? And they're like, yeah, come on. So there were Israelites who were in the army of the Philistines attacking Israelites because it was easier. It was safer. They took a calculation and they said, that army's bigger than we are. We should join them. That's number one possibility. The other possibility was they were taken captive and forced to do things like forced labor. Go cut our wood. Go get our water. But either way, there were Israelites in the Philistines' camp. And when Jonathan came through, busted in, and all of this chaos started to spread, the Hebrews who were in the camp started to attack the Philistines, right? Then it says, verse 22, likewise, when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed hard after them in the battle. So all the other cowards who were just hiding out in the mountains, when they see all these ants of people starting to scatter and flee and they see the chaos, they're like, oh, now's our time. Now is our time to react. We can get our honor back. Even if we showed ourselves to be cowards in the beginning, at least we can do something in the end. And so now you have all of Israel. Everybody who is named as an Israelite is attacking the Philistines. So this is fascinating. It starts out with one person who was able to lead one more person who is the armor bearer, and it turned into the entire nation coming out, crawling out of the hills and falling upon the Philistines. And this was a great victory, a massive victory. That's what it says in verse 23. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed beyond Bethaven. They just kept pushing and going and pushing and going, and God was amazing. And I wish that was the end of the story, but it just keeps going. It just keeps going. And you really start to see the quality of leadership. You get to see Jonathan really spreading his wings, and then you get to see Saul really cowering in a corner like a coward. But the Lord saved Israel. Okay? 24 through 35. And the men of Israel had been hard-pressed that day. Why? So Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies." So none of the people had tasted food. The people were hard-pressed. Why were they hard-pressed? Exactly. And the war's not over. They're still going. They're chasing them and just like cutting them down as they go. They are pushing them back one person at a time. Because if you imagine it, there's 600,000 people, right? 600,000 people, and you're in the front getting attacked, and you turn around to run away. And what do you run into? Your own army. You can't go anywhere. It's like running through these chairs. Try running through them. You're going to just fall and stumble. And here's all your enemies, the Israelites, coming behind you, just hacking you to pieces, right? That's why they start, that's not why, but part of the reason why they're attacking each other is to like, get out of my way, I'm running from battle. And they're like, no, you stand here and fight. Like, you can imagine the confusion that's going on. So Saul, looking at all of his men, he's thinking in his mind, he doesn't want them to be lazy. He doesn't want them to get sleepy. He doesn't want them to take a break. He wants them to keep going. So this is what he says. If you eat anything, if you touch any food and put it in your mouth, you're cursed. And this is a really big deal with a superstitious population. If you believed when you knocked over salt, you needed to throw it behind you, then you're the type of person who would listen to Saul and quake in your boots. Be like, oh no, we're going to be cursed, right? Because you believe in superstition, that if you walk under a ladder, oh no, you're going to die. Something terrible is going to happen. So when the king says, if you eat it, you will be cursed, it's a really big deal. So it's one of the worst things that you can say to this people. It's not just losing your life, it's about dying under a curse and going to hell, right? So Saul is worried about the people getting slackish and lazy and eating too much and getting gluttonous and feasting. So he says, don't eat anything. You better keep going. And he presses the people on to keep going. Then in verse 25, now when all the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dripping, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. Where do you guys find honey? From the bees. What is the land full of? Milk and honey. Right? That's the promise. That's the promise of God, that this land is so bountiful, so wonderful, it literally has honey dripping off of the trees, which is amazing. That's great. So you'd imagine the Philistines are running away and maybe they're knocking it down. Maybe the Philistines are eating it because they're starving and they're trying to get away. Because when you're fighting all day long, you run out of energy really quick. On average, do you know how long fights last? It's just a couple of seconds because you lose so much energy so quickly. You put out 100% effort, and that 100% effort drops your battery in a heartbeat. Imagine fighting all day long. It's difficult. Like, I have a hard time watching MMA for 15 minutes. I don't know how those guys get in the ring and fight for 15 minutes at 3-minute bouts. So this idea about food is really important. Saul made them swear not to take it. And they ran into the forest, and it was sitting there for them. It's almost a divine blessing. It's almost as if God was like, hey, I got you. Here you go. Right? He used ravens in the past. Who knows what he used to drop the honey there? But Saul, in his folly, declares that if you touch it, you're cursed. So this is what happens, verse 27. But Jonathan didn't hear his father's charge the people with the oath. So he put out the tip of his staff that was in his hand, and he dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little of this honey? How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found. For now the defeat among the Philistines has not been great. So not only is this a failure on a king's part, but it's a failure on a father's part. And it's interesting that Jonathan is so transparent to call out the truth. And he's like, man, how sucky, how terrible. Imagine, he's like, I just had a little bit and I feel so much better. That energy, that sugar is feeding my body. My glucose is all level and good to go. I can keep fighting. Everybody else is starving. He has troubled Israel today. How much better could the victory have been? Now, what's interesting is this is putting a stumbling block before Israel. This is not as just saying, hey, go left or right and being in charge. It's actually hindering people. And this is a really big deal. Jesus says, if you make a little one to stumble and sin, it's better that that you should have a millstone wrapped around your neck and you get tossed in the ocean. So Jesus doesn't play games when it comes into putting stumbling blocks in front of people. And this is what the king has done to his soldiers. And it's going to compound here in a second. So not only did it steal the victory, not only did it take away God's glory, it actually made the people sin. Verse 31 through 46. Verse 31, they struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were faint. It's the third time we've heard that. The people pounced on the spoil. They took sheep and oxen and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. And he said, you have dealt treacherously. Roll a great stone to me here. And Saul said, disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, let every man bring an ox, his sheep, and slaughter them here and eat. Do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. So every one of the people brought his ox with him that night, and they slaughtered them there, and Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. So we find that after the people had restrained themselves out of fear of the curse, fear of the vow, they lost all control. They were loosed upon their cravings, and they were eating with the blood. Biblically, it's really bad. God says don't do it. So I don't hunt. We don't butcher our own meat. But what ends up happening is when you kill an animal, you, as soon as possible, you string it up and you slit the throat and you let the blood run out. I don't know all the details about it. All I know is God said specifically, you do not eat this with the blood. In the New Testament, it's one of the only commandments left in the church by the elders. They say, look to do good and to live in good works, and keep yourself unstained from the world, and do not eat with the blood. That's one of the only commandments issued after lots of issues arose in the church. And so here the people lose it. They start to sin against the Lord. And whose fault is it? Saul's. But what's his response? You guys are sinning. Once you have left the way of true religion, it's really easy to call out those who are struggling in the way of true religion, right? So he calls them out and he's like, you guys, that's it. Bring the stone over here. Right? And he's going to offer a sacrifice and he's going to do lots of things, but it's vain. It's empty. His whole demeanor, his whole person has shifted. He's a different person. He's a different Saul than we knew in the very beginning, where he had that charm and that humility. Now he's like, you guys suck. You are unrestrained and you're doing craziness. So get over here. We're going to fix this, right? Then in verse 36, Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light. Let us not leave a man of them. And they said, do whatever seems good to you. But the priest said, let us draw near to God. And Saul inquired of the Lord, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But he did not answer him that day. Saul, after the people have finally eaten, is like, all right, guys, back to work, right? He's not caring about his soldiers. He's not considering the state that they're in, having been fighting all day long. He's going to keep driving them and pushing them with one mind, with one pursuit. And it's interesting, thankfully, he brought this priest. And the priest was like, maybe we should take a second and consider what God wants us to do. And he's like, I guess if we have to, right? I put that in there. So he's like, yeah, let's inquire of the Lord. This is great. And then they go to inquire of the Lord, and what do they get? They get nothing. They get nada, because God's not listening. He's not there. And this is interesting because it just keeps going. He says, oh, there must be sin in the camp. There must be a problem. Verse 38, and Saul said, come here, all you leaders of the people, and know and see how this sin has arisen today. Oh, this is bad news, everybody. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But there was not a man among all the people who answered him. So he breaks out again. He's not thinking, and this is what he says. Everybody come here. God is angry. God is angry because somebody did something. No, nobody? Look, even if it's Jonathan, the man who just brought the victory, right? Even if it's Jonathan, whoever did this is going to die. Now, this is not good leadership. I think we can see that. Verse 40. Then he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan, my son, will be on the other side, because obviously it's not us, it's you guys. And the people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. Therefore Saul said, O Lord God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant this day? If this guilt is in me or in Jonathan my son, O Lord God of Israel, give Urim. But if this guilt is in your people Israel, give Thummim. And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. It's interesting. They escaped the pledge of death. The people escaped, and they took Urim and Thummim. So Urim and Thummim is like two stones. We don't have a lot of detail. We don't have a lot of clarity about this. This is probably one of the most detailed events of an Urim and Thummim being used. And so the high priest would have them in his coat, and they would say, God, heads or tails. If it's heads, it's me and Jonathan. And they pull it out, and it's like, oh, it's heads. It's like, it's you guys, right? So it's a form of casting lots. What's interesting is it's not consistently used this way. People don't really know how the Urim and Thummim is used because it's really only explained in detail here, but earlier it wasn't discussed. When they said, God, we want to know your will, tell us what we are to do. Are we to go down there or are we to go over here? They didn't use the Urim and Thummim, or if they did, they used it in a different manner. Right? So we don't have a lot of clarity on that, but what we do know is that Jonathan is taken with Saul. Now, does Saul think he's the problem? We know it's Jonathan. Why is it Jonathan? Because it can't be Saul. Verse 42. They cast the lots between me and my son Jonathan, and Jonathan was taken. I set you up. 43. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. And Jonathan told him, I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I will die. That's honorable. I'll tell you what. That's a man of integrity. He's like, oh man, I didn't even know. I'm like super innocent, but that's all right. God knows. You just go ahead and kill me. 44. And Saul said, God, do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan. You think he'd be like, well, you're my son. We'll find a way around this. Verse 45, then the people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die, who has worked this great salvation in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people ransomed Jonathan, so that he did not die. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. The people chose Jonathan. Do you remember what we said? Jonathan's a man after whose heart? And Saul is a man after people. He is led by the people. Now, our government is actually based on this. So in our society, it's like, well, they're supposed to represent us. The problem is, we suck. So when they represent us, we get bad representatives, to be fair. But Saul is supposed to be a representative of God. Saul is supposed to pursue God himself. And the people are supposed to pursue God themselves. And they together are supposed to pursue God. But what ends up happening is the people pursue themselves and the king pursues the people. And that's a problem. So Saul always makes bad decisions and bad choices because his heart is in the wrong place. We say, follow your heart. No, you lead your heart. His heart was led to love the people, as in obey their voice, instead of loving and obeying the Lord. There's a couple of things we need to talk about. So this is a change of state. We have been watching from Judges all the way into Samuel. We're seeing the king. We're seeing how things are taking place. So we have to recognize God's instruments. God uses people. Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. God uses Saul. Is Saul good or is Saul bad?
Bad leader.
Bad leader. Saul's bad. Saul's all sorts of bad. But God also uses good. Who is good?
Jonathan.
Jonathan. Now, in history, back into the book of Judges, who did God use? The judges. Now, the judges weren't always perfect, but they were good, and God would bring victory through the judge. So what we find here is God uses judges and kings, right? It's a new era of kings. But what we're going to find out is God will actually not use kings. He will abandon kings. He never abandoned judges. If we remember back in the book of Judges, it says, as long as that judge lived, the people were delivered. As long as the judge was alive, God delivered them on every side from all of their enemies. But what will happen as we move forward through these books is that if it's a good king, God delivers them. And if it's a bad king, God punishes them with their enemies. He is going to use bad people to punish his people. And this is a massive change of state that we're going to find in Israel. Is we're going to get all the way into the Assyrians and the Babylonians coming down, just destroying Israel, carrying them away captive thousands of miles. And it's going to be because they had evil kings, and God is going to punish them. So what is the takeaway? What is a really good application? What do you guys think in this chapter applies to your life, to my life? What are the lessons that we can learn that apply to us? Right? But he is also a man of authority. So he took charge with the authority he had, but he never usurped the authority of those around him. Like, he never said, like, screw you, Dad, I'm the king, right? Even when his dad's like, everybody cross and put a line, and there's us over here, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. He always obeyed his father. He did it respectfully. And even when it was like, Jonathan, you got to die, he's like, oh, I guess I got to die. So it's an interesting thing, authority. How about faith, belief? What's really good about Jonathan is he did what he knew was right, and he believed in something that other people didn't believe. He knew the God of Israel, and he knew that he was calling him to do something. And so he stepped out, and he took action, and he went. And he kind of questioned it along the way. He said, if we go up, and if they say this, then we know we have our answer, right? If they say that they're going to come down to us, they're obviously not going to climb down here. He's like, we'll just go home. But if they say we should go to them, God's on our side. He's looking for assurance of the conviction of the things that he hopes in. So here's an interesting thing about believing. There needs to be this step, this progress forward. If you can't see the destiny, you don't know where you're going. We have to believe in a couple things. We have to believe that change can happen. Jonathan looked at this army. It was shocked, but not shocked as everybody else was. Jonathan looked and thought, we can have victory. He thought there could be a change. Then he had faith that he himself could be changed with it. He could be transformed into a good warrior as he pressed through. And then that he could be the change. That he could be the instrument in God's hand, even if it was small and insignificant, to bring change. And as we look in our lives, if we can't believe that we can do something, we will never do it. If we don't believe that change is good, then we don't want to change. This was a big one for me before I was a Christian. I was like, I'm a really good person, and I'm super great, and I'm wonderful without God, and I don't want to change. Then I became a Christian, and I was like, man, I cannot wait to change. I am so tired of this guy. So being willing to change means that you have to believe that change is good. Jonathan kicked the hornet's nest, and things got worse before they got better. If we look back in chapter 13, the victory that he brought a lot more negative consequences than positive consequences. But he knew that the change was going to be good, and he was excited for the change. And when he didn't see that change moving forward, when he didn't see what he had hoped to see, he took action. He wanted things to be changed, therefore he became an instrument of change. But it was all because of his faith in God. He believed that God could work miracles through big or through small, because he is a mighty God. Amen.